Welcome to episode 22 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. On Stageworthy, I interview people who make theater, actors, directors, playwrights, and more, and talk to them about everything from why they chose the theater to their work process and anything in between. Alexandra Simpson is an interdisciplinary theater artist with a background in dance, music, documentary, playwriting, installation, and directing, and the founder of the Terra Incognita collective. She was joined by collective members Chris Whidden, Kevin Wong, Elizabeth Staples, and Morgan Johnson to talk about their upcoming show, Terra Incognita, running from June 3rd to June 6th in Toronto. You can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you like what you hear, I hope you'll subscribe on iTunes or Google Music or whatever podcast app you use, and consider leaving a comment or rating.
I'm Alexandra Simpson.
I'm Chris Whidden.
And I'm Kevin Matthew Wong.
And you guys are preparing for a mask show. Is that, like, just simplifying it, you're doing a mask performance. Can you tell me a little bit about the performance that you're preparing for?
Yeah.
Who's speaking?
Yeah. I'll start and you guys fill in. So the show that we're preparing for is called Terra Incognita. That's probably Elizabeth. Hey, come on and go. Hey there. Hi, lady. That's okay. Come on. You have to say your name.
Hi there.
I'm Elizabeth Staples.
Nice to meet you, Elizabeth. I'm Phil.
Hey.
This will be a little bit chaotic,
Yeah.
but we'll just keep it going. This is great. Yeah.
Sure. So the performance we're preparing for is called Terra Incognita by the Terra Incognita Collective. And it's a collectively created documentary mass work about degrowth environmentalism and our complicity within growth culture. So it's a combination of interviews that I took when I lived with a degrowth community in Sèvres, France. It's a combination of our explorations together as a group, looking through the history of growth culture, and our own personal experiences. And then we've also gone out and done some pop-up performances around the city of Toronto. And so that's also being recorded, and it kind of acts as like a media outlet within the piece itself, these pop-up performances.
Now, when you say growth culture, can you tell me exactly what that means? It's not a phrase that I'm familiar with. Can somebody tell me what that is?
Well, I guess I'll give my understanding of it, because a lot of the things we discuss, and degrowth just itself is something that is not always the same for everybody. It's defined, from their own perspective. And to me, growth culture is essentially like we're in growth culture. We have this idea that everything in society, the economy, and everything about us has to always be exponentially growing. When really there's just not enough for everyone to always be at this huge peak of growth. Like our economy must always be in a surplus, and then there must not be poverty. But if that was the case, there just wouldn't be anything left to take at a certain point.
Yeah, a growth culture is a capitalist society based on GDP growth, and everything that we do is controlled by money and the power that money brings. Yeah.
So, I've of course heard of documentary theater before, but the idea of mixing documentary theater with mask is something that I haven't heard of before.
Me either.
Can you tell me a little bit about how these two fit together?
Yeah. So there's this great quote by Frederick Jameson, and it says, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism," something like that. And there's lots of articles talking about the lack of imagination that we have as a culture to imagine alternatives. So the cool thing about mass is that it expands that imaginary, and we can begin to explore alternative personalities, alternative thoughts, even in the artists who are underneath the mask. So it's really freeing in that way. And then it also we take inspiration from street performers, and there's this one great street performer called Natasha Tisakos, and she says that when she's in a mask, she has relationships with people that she doesn't have without the mask. So when doing audience immersive theater, it's also a really cool tool to kind of extend the hand of immersion to your audience members, perhaps in a less intimidating way, inviting them for that hour or whatever to do something, to act in a way, to think in a way that's not unlike themselves in the day-to-day life that we would experience in growth culture. So that's kind of
and more practically, the way that we worked documentary theater and mask is that we would read articles and we would have discussions about certain topics and about Alex's experiences living in Kentakesh. And then we would put on these masks and do different mask techniques to get into character, and then not really taking like direct inspiration, but just like after having those discussions, letting that influence the characters that we build and the situations that we build, but it was all through improvisation.
Right. On the theme of alternatives too, like we have two very alternative worlds to each other, but also very alternative from our own world. So we have sort of the worst possible scenario world to start off, which we call the growth world. And then we have the sort of best possible scenario world, which is the degrowth world, which is what some academics wish could happen or hope, some anticipate will happen inevitably, and some don't. And I think that's really interesting. And the way that we sort of explored as well, we started with the world that was more familiar to ours, which was actually the world that was the worst possible scenario world. And the way that we got to the best possible scenario world is actually the community that Alex visited and looking at actual interviews. So I guess that's another element of the documentary element. We're looking at real people, and our first masks in the first half of the show are abstractions. They're people who exist in a fantastical alter universe. But what's interesting about the second part of the show is we inhabit real people, and we're listening to their actual text, and as much as possible we're trying to stay true to what they say, the cadence of how they speak too, and also that it's a sort of international community that Alex interacted with, which was really fascinating too. Every one of us sort of puts on a different accent. Not sort of, but we actually have very different accents too, and they all disagree, but agree in some ways too. It's wonderful.
Were you all masked performers before you came to this, or was this something new to you?
I'm trained in devised and physical theater, so like movement-based theater. Physical theater was something that I was very familiar with. I had never done mask work before, so it was the first part of our process, the first like 3 or 4 months that we were together was very, very much about getting to know these masks that Alex had created and we kind of just did trial and error about the techniques that we used and what we found was the best way to create a character from these things.
I myself went to school. Alex and I both went to Ryerson, and one of the faculty members there who used to be chair of it, but is still working there, taught us mask. His name is Perry Schneiderman, and he's a student of Lecoq, and so he brought that technique over. And so in school we had done a part of a semester with mask, and I personally had done one performance, but other than that, this is my first venture back.
For me, my experience with mask has been with like neutral mask through my training. So it was quite different to be given the agency to do something that wasn't neutral in a mask and also to speak in a mask. That was kind of odd and really freeing actually in these last few weeks. It's been really, really freeing. But what brought me to the project was actually the idea of environmental issues in theater. For the last few years, I've been working with some collaborators on environmental issues theater that looks quite different from this, but taking this vantage has been quite a good experience.
Cool. And Alexandra?
I did it in school and I loved it, and then I trained with Sonia Norris. I did like a 6-month character mask workshop. Just loved it. And then I recently had a gig, been back 2 times now. I had a gig in Calgary with Swallow Bicycle Theatre, and we're creating a mask piece that's supposed to be produced in 2017. So it's kind of like we went for 2 weeks and then we went for 3 weeks. So So that, but then, yeah, for me it's been, like, it's my first time leading Mask, a bunch of people in Mask. It's my first time making Mask, so it's been a lot of trial and error for myself too, and then also trying to figure out ways to converge documentary and this really creative, liberating Mask work, and how to, like, make those two connect. So it's been a lot of experimentation, which has been quite wonderful.
Have you, did you learn mask making, or is it completely trial and error for you?
It's been trial and error. What's his name? Dave Nez is a mask maker from Illinois. And so I was just looking at websites and books and stuff, and I saw his technique, and he used paper bags and wood glue to make his mask. So I was like, oh, that's cool. I can, like, use all my LCBO bags that are lying around in my house for my roommates and myself, and recycle the paper. So I also tried to make masks that came from recycled material, trying to stick with the theme of environmentalism within the things we create as well. But yeah, like some of my first masks, or my first mask wasn't so good, so I gave it a rhinoplasty, and it's now a character within the piece named Craig. So, but it's also this, like, kind of losing the fear of, like, cutting into them, because eventually I learned, like, oh, even if I cut into it, I can just rebuild the nose, or, you know, if I screw up that badly, I can fix it. So.
Now, I'm curious. Two of you mentioned Ryerson, and you mentioned that you studied Devised Theatre, and where? So other than Ryerson, you studied Devised Theatre at
Humber.
At Humber.
Humber College,
okay, cool. And because I'm always curious about one of the things that I like to explore is where people started working in theater and what their journey there was. It's hard with a group, but I do want to talk a little bit about that. Why don't we start with Alexandra, and we'll talk about just tell me a little bit about how you came to theater, how you discovered theater, and then maybe a little bit about how that relates to Mask, and then we'll go around and we'll talk to everybody.
This is good for me too.
Takes me back. Well, I was either gonna go to school for something like biology, because I was always interested in the human body and also nature stuff, or I was going to go to theater school, and I wound up getting into Ryerson, which was the school of my choice, and so I went there. So that's where it kind of began. But I was very, very shy as a kid, and had a lot of social anxiety. So for me, theater was a place where I could, like, talk to people with a purpose. And so, and now I don't have those same anxieties. So it really helped me get over that hump. And then similarly for, like, I think the big turning point for me in theater school, which is why I've continued to pursue kind of mask and clown stuff, was when Leah Cherniak came and did a clown course with me, or with our group in third year, and that was a huge turning point, because I was like, oh, this is fun, and it's not stressful, and it's fun to create, and I finally felt the joy of
silly instead of so serious.
Totally. So yeah, so that was it for me, and then I'm actually doing my master's in documentary media, which is what part of this is for, and that's been great because I graduated from theater school and I had this certain set of skills, but I felt very limited in terms of what I could talk about, and the issues that I felt passionately about, I didn't feel like I was well enough informed to actually do it. So what this master's program has done for me is given me 2 years to, like, sit down and research and really figure out what good research is, and then have the confidence to bring together this wonderful group of people and to talk about these issues within a group. So this is like my dream project. Great. So it's really cool.
Now, before theater school, what was it that introduced you to theater? Do you remember what what brought you to that?
I mean, I was in the performing arts program at O'Neill Collegiate in Oshawa, and but a superstar by no means, and I actually found it quite frustrating because I was always, like, the girl who got kind of put in the bag in the alto section and things like that, and so I was like, God damn, I hate this, and then I had no hopes of getting into theater school, but I still wanted to do it, and I guess I danced and I play piano and stuff, so I guess arts was always in my background, so it just kind of pushed me in this direction, and really it was getting into Ryerson Theater School that was like, okay, maybe I should do this. So.
Cool.
So it was all very just, like, instinctual for me. I grew up in the 90s, so of course Disney movies were like really I consider my first introduction to theater, because I would, it was just instinct. I would act along. I'd pick a character whenever I'd watch a movie, and I would act along, and now I know all the words to literally all the movies. Still,
course, yeah.
It's just ingrained in me, and so it was just instinctual. So my mom saw that I was doing that naturally, and she put me into ballet, but then I was mad that I couldn't sing, so then she put me into musical theater. And then I started doing musical theater, and I was like, I really liked dancing, but I was never a dancer per se. Like I could never do a grand jeté. Like yeah, I was never that. And then I went to arts high school as well, and I was the brown noser. I was totally teacher's pet, because like that was the only part of school that I was actually good at, was the acting stuff. I don't do other stuff very well. I'm good at talking, not necessarily writing. So after that, it was just the only thing that I wanted to pay money for in post-secondary to get an education was theater. There was nothing else I would have really gone for. And I got into Humber Theater School, and it was the absolute perfect match for me, because they're focused mainly on physical theater and devised work. There is some classical training as well, but I definitely clung on to Grotowski work and Lecoq's work and Clown and Buffon and things like that.
For me, I mean, when I was young, my parents really only ever introduced me to musical theater. That's all they ever wanted to see. So that was, I guess, my introduction to stage. And then come high school, we're going downtown to see professional productions of plays, and I'm going, oh, there's other stuff. and so then it was like I just felt at home on stage, and theater was my community, it was my way into finding community. And then Ryerson was, it's where I started to feel like I could take this seriously and professionally. As for mass work, when we were introduced to mass work with Perry, I saw such a huge opportunity for reaching those places inside yourself that you don't normally get to. As an actor, like a young man could play an old woman, and it could be a very real, very convincing, very heartwarming, whatever it needs to be, performance. And I would even sometimes go to mass classes that were not in my year, in our busy schedule, if I could, and watch, because you see these people and you see this young girl playing this completely, you would never suspect they had the ability to perform that way, or that kind of person or that aspect of themselves, and I think it brings that out. So I loved that part of it, and that really drew me to mask.
What brought me to theater? I didn't intend to go to theater school initially. Initially, my parents always put me in music, and it was so regimented, and I had to play an instrument, and it didn't fit, and I didn't practice and whatever. But my aunts would bring me to theater shows downtown, and so I guess I just started auditioning for school shows and stuff like that when I was a kid. And that was really fun, and I think it was an excuse to leave class in the daytime. It was an excuse to sing and dance and do stuff like that. But I was really convinced I was going to go to school for environmental science. Super, super convinced. And then I went to the campus at Guelph and realized Guelph wasn't for me. So that's how I actually ended up at U of T. And so I thought the other thing that I was really interested in was international relations. So I went for international relations. And I think also a lot of my history was about disagreeing with things that were happening. In Markham, where I grew up, we took part in, not protesting, but speaking to this project, this bill that was called the Food Belt, and it was to try to stop development above a certain street in Markham. And going to the town hall meetings about that was super eye-opening in terms of how many different perspectives there were. This was farmers' livelihoods. They couldn't get any Canadian labor. They had to get all of their foreign labor from Jamaica. Farmers were being offered $100 million for the land. to make basically cookie cutter houses on the best farmland in Canada. It was shocking. And you would see these giant piles of death in Markham. Once you pull up the topsoil, the soil can't grow anything again.
Right.
So that was a big part of it too. So in first year I was in IR and I was thinking about maybe pursuing public policy, but then I also took one drama course and that led to the drama center, and there's a beautiful drama community at U of T. Collectively we mount something like 25 plays a year, plus anywhere from like 9 to 12 original productions at every U of T drama festival. It's a beautiful community, so that really brought me into it. And so then eventually I got into the theater program there. And in the second year, a friend and I were like, we really don't think that our acting training is really connecting to our sort of activist environmentalist beliefs. So we founded a theater company called Broadleaf Theater, and we do environmental issues work through there. And that's really informed my practice going forward, and like what I'm interested in. Devised work has come through that, and and producing work has come through that too. So that's what I'm interested in.
Now you guys, I think, all have graduated from theater school far more recently than I did. I graduated in 1993. And at the time that I was in theater school, nobody talked about creating your own theater. We were prepared for go to the audition, get the job, go to the next audition, get the job, and that would be our careers. And it's only as time goes on that it's become more important for self-producing. We knew of Fringe, of course, Fringe was a thing, but it wasn't a big deal. And self-created work wasn't a big deal. When you guys were in school, was that more of what they were talking about, or is it something that you just had to learn to do?
Yes and no, and I guess it depends on the program. I would say personally, like very little. We did have one class, a creative writing class, that would eventually culminate in our fourth year with a week or a week and a half of plays that were created by our fourth year students, and then you had to produce them, but you got tons of support is the thing, and really you put on these plays at no cost, so you got some experience of like, okay, this is what do we need, but things like your venue was paid for, lights paid for, all the people involved were students, so it was directed by a student, written by a student, performed by students almost always. And like costumes, you would just, what is available that's not being used by the school, you could use. And so the budget for it would be like, not a lot. Yeah. So like you learn not as much, but I wish we had learned more, because I think there's a big shift. Like the indie theater is becoming much more respected community and legitimate professional community. Because so many people are really singing for their supper out there and are not as secure, so they're putting on their like work from their heart, and I think that's, I mean, I could be wrong, but the shift that's going to be taking over eventually, because how often can you see the same plays done by the same companies?
I think we're seeing more interesting work being done in more spaces and there are more available spaces to work in that aren't the spaces that you're going to pay like half your budget just for the rental. You're seeing more storefront theaters and things like that.
Humber is a very particular program where they do mainly focus on self-produced work, because it's also a really new, like I know Ryerson and U of T, they've been around for like a really, really long time. Humber's only, I think, less than 20 years old almost. So they have a huge focus on self-produced writing and different forms of devising, which I was super grateful for, because I'm actually more confident creating my own piece than I am going in for a Shakespeare audition. And because I really don't have any interest in Shakespeare at all.
I've spent more time in the last 10 years creating my own work than I have even auditioning for anything else.
And site-specific work too. They teach you how to create around your space, using the space to influence what you're doing, because I have a huge interest in guerrilla theater as well. I think the proscenium arch is like slowly evaporating.
I really wish there had been a more extensive class on grant writing
Yeah.
and applications.
Yeah. So I think everybody could say that.
Yeah.
Oh,
We got
there's
one.
the one class in Canada
Yeah.
that has a class.
Yep.
And it's an embarrassing thing, like when you're starting out, not knowing, like especially like
Especially trying to explain this
That's-
kind of work
yeah.
to
Mhm.
me.
It's also like, I mean, there is a huge cottage industry that surrounds like learning to write grants, and people make a lot of money teaching other people how to write grants. But it's certainly a skill. I know we were joined late by somebody.
Yes.
Trying to.
How do I bring you in?
I don't know if this is like
No.
no.
Come on in. This is. And what your name is?
Morgan.
Morgan.
Yeah.
And what are you doing in with the production?
I'm an actor, creator, performer.
And I've jumped in with a bunch of people about what
Yeah.
their background is and how they came to theater. Let's throw that question to you.
Sure. So, how far back should I go?
What was your first, how did you first get, what was your first exposure to theater, and how did you know that it was going to be a thing for you?
Well, I was extraordinarily shy as a child, would not speak to anyone, if they weren't my mom. But my sister was pretty outgoing, and we were homeschooled, so or unschooled, we didn't have curriculum, we were just pretty much playing and discovering ourselves outside and stuff. So we played a lot of storytelling and make-believe games, and that was my entry into theater. So we would make movies and make up stories, and that pretty much do that all day long. And then I was in drama classes and theater programs, and then I went to an arts high school, and then I went to theater school, and then after theater school I was trying to figure out how to fuse politics and things like that into theater. If I'm trained to be able to communicate these stories really well, what am I communicating? And if I don't know what that is, then I'm pretty much a puppet.
Yeah.
So I started kind of trying to create my own work around environmental issues, and I'm now doing my master's in environmental studies at York, and it's a very interdisciplinary program. Sorry, I just was biking really fast. It's a really interdisciplinary program, so there's a lot of encouragement for using theater and the arts, kind of any different form of art. So there's musicians and painters, and to incorporate different studies that you might be interested in with the arts or doing arts-based forms of research. So I'm looking at how human whale and human ocean relationships can speak to larger issues of environmental justice, and how those can be communicated and discussed through theater forms.
Have you done mask before?
Yes.
Yeah?
So my high school actually had a pretty strong focus on mask work, because one of the main drum teachers was a mask performer, and then in theater school also there was a lot of emphasis on that.
Cool. Now I know that we only have a half hour of progress, because you guys are cutting into your rehearsal time to talk about it, and I appreciate
We're so
that.
close.
Can you guys just quickly talk about the performance is coming up soon? When is it? Where can people see it?
Yeah. So the performance is Terra Incognita. It's at the Warehouse, which is 10 Busy Street. It's at just at Queen and Logan. If you see a Starbucks and a Penguin sandwich shop, you're in the right place. And it's June 3rd to the 6th at 8 p.m. And we have an additional matinee at 2:30. And the performance is about an hour long. You'll be walking and sitting, so wear comfortable shoes. And then it's followed by a discussion with a local activist or artist, and with some food sharing. So there's 3 of the nights we ask that people bring some kind of food item, and we have a volunteer chef who, while you're watching the show, is in here preparing some food for us to share together and talk about stuff. And then the other 2 nights are sponsored by Choco Soul, which is a fair trade chocolate place. So they will be here for 2 nights and help. They lead a discussion one night on ecological businesses, and they're just here to serve chocolate the other night. So.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much for taking some time to talk to me today. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank
Yeah.
you.